The soft chime of the bell above the grocery store door was something Claire had heard 1,000 times before, but today it carried an unexplainable weight. Her life was predictable, carefully orchestrated by years of routine. Mornings began with coffee in a chipped mug she had owned since her 30s. Afternoons were spent working remotely at a job that never excited her, and evenings ended with novels she had read before, stories more vibrant than her own life had ever been. The store was dimly lit, its aisles lined with products she could navigate with her eyes closed. Claire reached for a can of tomatoes when a voice, warm and unfamiliar, startled her. "Do you think these are good for spaghetti sauce?" She turned, the can still in her hand, and saw a young man holding a similar can. He was in his mid-30s, she guessed, with sandy hair that fell in loose waves and a kind smile that seemed out of place in the stark fluorescence of a store. Claire chuckled softly, her voice shaky from disuse. "Depends on how much effort you're willing to put in. These are fine if you're going for simple." He tilted his head as though considering her words deeply. "Simple sounds like my speed. Thanks for the tip." Claire watched as he placed the can in his basket, noticing how his presence broke through the monotony of her day. As he moved down the aisle, something inside her stirred, a flicker of life she hadn't felt in years. The encounter was brief, yet as she walked home with her own groceries, she found herself replaying it, dissecting the warmth in his tone and the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. It was nothing, she told herself, just a passing moment. But that night, as she sat in her quiet kitchen stirring a pot of soup, Claire realized she couldn't shake the memory. It was as though a tiny crack had formed in the armor of her solitude, letting in a beam of light she wasn't sure she was ready for. Claire didn't expect to see him again. The grocery store was a revolving door of faces she rarely noticed. But a week later, as she stood in the produce section debating over avocados, there he was. "Hey, tomato expert." She looked up, startled, and saw the same easy smile. He held up a basket with a pack of spaghetti and a jar of sauce. "Your advice worked. Dinner was actually edible. Thought I'd let you know." Claire laughed, a sound she realized had become foreign to her. "I'm glad I could be of service. Back for another round of culinary experiments." "Trying to level up," he replied. "Any recommendations?" She hesitated but then gestured toward the fresh herbs. "Basil makes a big difference. It's worth the extra step." "What would I do without you?" he teased, picking up a bunch and dropping it into his basket. "By the way, I'm Erin." "Claire," she replied, feeling an odd mix of shyness and excitement. Their conversation lingered a little longer this time. Enough for Claire to learn he'd recently moved to town for work, that he loved to cook but rarely had the time, and that he enjoyed simple joys like walking in the park after a long day. Over the next few weeks, their paths seemed to cross more frequently. A quick hello in the bakery aisle turned into a chat about recipes. A chance meeting in the frozen food section led to a debate about the best ice cream flavors. Claire found herself looking forward to these encounters, her heart lifting when she saw him approach. Then, one rainy afternoon, Erin surprised her. "Do you have any favorite spots around here?" he asked as they both stood in line at the cashier. "Spots? Yeah. Places to eat, walk, or just hang out. I'm still figuring out the area." Claire thought for a moment. "There's a little cafe near the park. Quiet, cozy. It's nice." "Sounds perfect," he said, his smile widening. "Would you want to join me there sometime? Maybe show me around?" Her heart skipped a beat. For a moment, she considered saying no. It felt safer to keep their connection confined to the grocery store. But the thought of sitting across from him, talking without the distraction of shelves and baskets, was too tempting to resist. "I'd like that," she said softly. And just like that, their friendship began to extend beyond the store's aisles. The cafe turned out to be an unassuming little gem, nestled on a quiet street near the park. Erin arrived before Claire, waving her over from a corner table by the window. "I got us coffee," he said as she slid into the seat across from him. "Hope you like lattes." "Lattes are perfect," she said, smiling. Their conversation flowed as easily as it had in the grocery store, but here, in the warm intimacy of the cafe, it felt different, deeper. He talked about his work as a graphic designer, the thrill of bringing ideas to life, and his love for art. She spoke of her late husband, the quiet years after his passing, and the sense of rediscovery she'd begun to feel recently. Aaron listened intently, his eyes warm and understanding. "You're braver than you think, Claire," he said after a moment of reflection. His words lingered with her long after their coffee cups were empty. That afternoon set the tone for the weeks to come. They met at the cafe every few days, walked through the park, or sometimes strolled the farmer's market, Aaron marveling at the array of fresh produce while Claire guided him through her favorite ingredients. It was during one such walk that Claire noticed something had shifted within her. Aaron was carrying a bag of apples they just picked out when he stopped to admire a street musician. The man was playing a soulful tune on his violin, the notes weaving through the air. Aaron turned to her, his face alight with wonder. "Isn't this beautiful?" Claire nodded, but her attention wasn't on the music. It was on him. The way his eyes softened, the way his laugh came easily, the way he seemed so effortlessly present. The realization hit her like a wave, its force both thrilling and terrifying. She had feelings for him. It wasn't just his kindness or his charm. It was the way he made her feel seen, in a way she hadn't felt in years. It was the way he brought color to her otherwise grayscale days. But almost as quickly as the joy came, doubt followed. She was in her 50s, and Aaron couldn't be more than 30. What would he think if he knew? What would anyone think? That night, lying in bed, Claire stared at the ceiling, her heart heavy with questions. This wasn't supposed to happen. Aaron was just a friend, wasn't he? Yet the way her heart raced when he smiled, the way her breath caught when he touched her arm in passing, told her otherwise. For the first time in years, Claire felt alive, and that terrified her. Claire tried to ignore the growing feelings stirring within her, but they refused to be silenced. Every time she thought of Aaron, his quick wit, his warm smile, the way he listened as if every word she said mattered, her heart ached with a mix of joy and fear. She spent hours analyzing their every interaction. Was there something in the way he looked at her, the way his voice softened when he spoke her name? Or was she reading too much into it, desperate to believe that someone like him could ever feel the same way? Her internal conflict consumed her. She went about her days distracted, her thoughts oscillating between elation and dread. One evening, she confided in her best friend, Margot, over a bottle of wine. "I've done something foolish," Claire began, her cheeks flushing. Margot raised an eyebrow. "Foolish? You?" "Impossible." Claire hesitated, the words catching in her throat. I think I have feelings for someone." Margot set her glass down, her curiosity piqued. "Well, that's not foolish at all. Who's the lucky man?" Claire's voice dropped to a whisper. "He's younger. Much younger." For a moment, Margot said nothing, her expression unreadable. Then she leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. "How much younger are we talking?" Claire looked down at her hands, twisting them nervously. "About 20 years. Claire." Margot's tone was careful, but her eyes betrayed her surprise. "Does he feel the same?" "I don't know," Claire admitted. "And even if he did, what would people think?" "What would he think?" "I'm old enough to be his." "Stop right there," Margot interjected. "You're not old enough to be his mother. And even if you were, love doesn't come with an age restriction." "But it's different," Claire insisted. "I'm in my 50s. I have wrinkles and gray hair. He deserves someone." "Someone what?" "Younger. Prettier." Margot shook her head. "Claire, you're selling yourself short. If he's the kind of man you describe, he won't care about any of that. The real question is, can you let yourself be happy?" That question stayed with Claire long after Margot left. Can I let myself be happy? The answer wasn't simple. Her feelings for Aaron had awakened something in her, something she thought had been long dormant. But the fear of rejection and the weight of societal judgment loomed large. And yet, every time she saw him, the doubts receded, replaced by the undeniable pull of connection. Claire knew she couldn't keep running from her emotions. But taking the next step would require more courage than she'd summoned in years. Claire spent the next week pacing her small kitchen, rehearsing words that never sounded quite right. Each time she saw Aaron at the grocery store, her resolve faltered. How could she ask him to come over without sounding ridiculous? Worse, what if he declined? One crisp afternoon, as autumn leaves spiraled in the breeze, Claire decided to take a walk to clear her head. She wandered aimlessly through the neighborhood, lost in thought. She knew she couldn't keep avoiding her feelings. If she didn't act, The what-ifs would haunt her far more than rejection ever could. The next time she saw Aaron, he was in the produce aisle, inspecting a bundle of fresh basil. She hesitated, then reminded herself of Margot's words. "Can you let yourself be happy?" Summoning a shaky smile, she approached him. "Trying your hand at Italian tonight?" Aaron turned, his face lighting up as it always did when he saw her. "Something like that. Thinking of making a pesto. Any tips?" Claire laughed softly. "Only that fresh is best. But if you want real inspiration," she hesitated for the briefest moment, then continued, "I could show you how to make it properly. I've got a recipe passed down from my grandmother." Aaron's brow lifted, his smile widening. "Are you offering me a cooking lesson, Claire?" Her heart raced, but she held his gaze. "I suppose I am. If you're interested." "I'd love that," he said, his voice warm and genuine. "When should we do this?" The words settled around her like a dream. He'd said yes. Claire felt a mix of elation and nervousness as they agreed on the following Saturday. When the day arrived, Claire found herself fussing over every detail. She cleaned the house twice, changed outfits 3 times, and checked her reflection more often than she cared to admit. The sight of herself in the mirror, a woman glowing with both excitement and trepidation, startled her. It had been years since she'd felt this alive. As the clock ticked closer to their agreed time, she moved to the kitchen, laying out fresh basil, pine nuts, olive oil, and parmesan. The act of preparing calmed her nerves, grounding her in the simplicity of the task. When the doorbell rang, her heart leapt into her throat. Taking a deep breath, she wiped her hands on a towel and went to greet him. Aaron stood there, a bottle of wine in one hand and his signature smile lighting up his face. "I come bearing gifts," he said, holding up the bottle. "Come in," Claire managed, her voice steadier than she expected. As he stepped into her home, the warmth of his presence filled the space, and Claire felt her apprehension melt away. For the first time in years, she dared to hope that this moment might lead to something extraordinary. Claire hadn't realized how much she had missed the simple joy of cooking with someone. As they chopped garlic and basil, their hands occasionally brushed, sending a spark of warmth through her veins. The kitchen, small and cozy, seemed to grow a little larger with every shared glance, every quiet laugh. Aaron's presence was easy, effortless. He wasn't just a guest, he felt like someone who belonged. The pesto came together quickly, fragrant and vibrant. They sat at the small kitchen table, their plates piled high, their glasses filled with wine. The soft hum of evening settled around them, the flicker of candlelight casting gentle shadows across the room. "I have to admit," Aaron said, looking at her over the rim of his glass, "this is better than anything I've had at a restaurant." Claire smiled, the compliment filling her chest with warmth. "It's the love you put into it," she said lightly, though her heart felt far more tender than she let on. They ate slowly, savoring the food and each other's company. The conversation flowed as easily as the wine, about life, travel, books they both loved, and the absurdities of growing older. With every word, Claire found herself drawn deeper into the rhythm of his presence, as if they had known each other far longer than just a few weeks. She realized, with a quiet shock, how much she enjoyed the novelty of this. Not just his company, but the way he made her feel, alive, seen, and free from the weight of her own inhibitions. At some point, their laughter slowed, and the conversation softened. The music playing quietly in the background seemed to fade into the distance. The evening air, cool with a hint of autumn's chill, filtered in through the open window, filling the room with its freshness. Claire could feel the growing tension, something neither of them had spoken of but both were aware of. There was an unspoken awareness hanging between them, something delicate, like the final note of a song that lingers in the air long after it's finished. Aaron set his wine glass down and leaned forward, his eyes locked with hers. The vulnerability in his gaze, so honest and raw, took her by surprise. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice low, "that maybe I've always been a little afraid of things like this, of real connections. But with you, I don't feel afraid anymore." Claire's breath caught in her throat. He was right. She, too, had been afraid of the unknown, of the consequences of following where her heart led. Her whole life she'd avoided this kind of intensity. But now, as she looked at him, she realized something had changed. It wasn't just a fleeting connection. It was something deeper, more real than she had expected. "I feel the same way," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't expect this either. But here we are." Aaron reached across the table, his hand hovering near hers. For a moment, they both hesitated, as if the simple act of touching might change everything. Then, with a quiet certainty, his fingers brushed against hers, the warmth of his skin sending a surge of heat through her. She didn't pull away. Instead, she met his touch, letting it linger. The moment felt as fragile as the thin strands of evening light filtering through the window, yet it was undeniable. For the first time in a long while, Claire felt that all the barriers she had built around herself were beginning to crumble, piece by piece. As Aaron left her apartment later that evening, Claire stood by the door, watching him disappear down the hall. Her heart was still pounding, her mind swirling with thoughts she hadn't dared entertain in years. She had kissed him, just a gentle touch of lips that sent her heart racing. And it had felt right, but as the door clicked shut behind her, the weight of her years seemed to settle back over her, a quiet reminder of the lives she had lived, the choices she had made. She leaned against the door, breathing in the stillness of the night. She couldn't deny it. She had been surprised by what had unfolded between them. At first, it had been so easy to dismiss the flutter of attraction. After all, what could they possibly have in common? He was young, so full of possibility, and she was far removed from the world of youth. Her life had unfolded in steady, predictable steps. There had been marriages, children, losses, and the quiet passage of time. She had long ago given up on the idea that love, passionate, all-consuming love, could find her again. And yet here he was. She thought about the moments they had shared, the intimacy that had blossomed in such an unexpected place. There had been something so freeing about the way he made her feel, like she wasn't just a woman past her prime, but someone still capable of feeling the rush of connection, the pull of desire. She hadn't felt that way in years. In truth, she hadn't allowed herself to feel that way. She had buried those desires under years of routine, of self-doubt, of fear that love might pass her by. But Aaron had awakened something in her, a part of herself she had forgotten existed. He made her feel vibrant again, and in his presence, she had started to believe that maybe age wasn't the barrier she had thought it was. Maybe it wasn't too late for her to feel all the things she had put aside. Maybe love wasn't about where you were in life, but about how you embraced it, how you let yourself be open to the possibility of connection, regardless of what anyone else might say. Claire sat down on the couch, her hands resting in her lap. She thought about the years she had spent alone, how she had convinced herself that she was content. But now, as she reflected on everything Aaron had brought into her life in such a short time, his humor, his warmth, his open-heartedness, she realized how much she had been missing. It wasn't just the companionship, though that was certainly a gift. It was the chance to feel seen again, to be reminded that her story wasn't over, that love had many chapters, no matter how late they came. She closed her eyes, letting the truth settle over her. This wasn't just about age or the fear of judgment from others. It was about the courage to embrace something beautiful when it appeared, to not let the world dictate the limits of her own happiness. Age was a number, yes, but it didn't define her capacity for love. Her thoughts turned to Aaron. What would happen between them? Was this just a passing fling? Or could it be something deeper? She didn't know. But for the first time in a long while, she wasn't afraid to find out. The uncertainty was no longer something that kept her at arm's length. It was part of the excitement, the mystery of something new and unexpected, something that felt real. Claire smiled to herself, a soft, private smile. She had nothing left to lose but the fears that had held her back for so long. And for once, she was ready to see where this could go. Wherever it led, she would face it with open arms, no longer bound by the expectations of others or the limitations of her own self-doubt. In the quiet of her apartment, she felt a quiet shift within her, an acceptance of the love she hadn't known she was still capable of receiving. And for the first time in many years, she felt truly alive. The morning sun filtered softly through the curtains as Claire sat at her kitchen table, a cup of tea cradled in her hands. The world outside was waking up, but she felt different today, more awake herself, more aware of the possibilities life still held, even in its later chapters. She had spent the past few days thinking about everything that had happened, about Aaron and what he had brought into her life. It wasn't just the thrill of a new romance or the warmth of companionship. It was something deeper, something profound about the nature of love itself. For so many years, she had believed that love had a shelf life. She thought it was something that came and went, something that belonged to the young, to the vibrant, to those who still had so much to offer. But now, as she reflected on her own journey, she saw things differently. Love wasn't confined to a specific age or stage in life. It wasn't just a fleeting spark that burned bright for a while before fading. No, love, true love, was about connection, about two souls meeting and intertwining, regardless of what the world thought or how old they were. She thought about the uncertainty she had felt in the beginning, the hesitancy that had kept her at a distance. She had worried about the judgment of others, about what people might think of her, about the differences in their ages. But she had learned something important in the last few days. Love, at its core, is fearless. It doesn't come with rules or boundaries. It comes when you're willing to be vulnerable, when you're brave enough to follow your heart, regardless of the noise around you. Claire stood up and moved to the window, gazing out at the quiet street. The neighborhood was just as it always was, familiar and unchanged. But she had changed. The world in some ways had always been the same, but her perception of it had shifted. There was a kind of freedom in that, a freedom to love, to live without fear, to stop worrying about what was expected of her and instead focus on what made her truly happy. She thought about Aaron again, about how in his presence, she had rediscovered parts of herself she had forgotten. How he made her feel not just seen, but truly alive. And though the future was uncertain, she wasn't afraid anymore. The love they shared wasn't defined by age or time. It was its own singular thing. It was the love that two people, connected by something deep and genuine, could share no matter what the world thought. And that was enough. As she finished her tea, Claire felt a quiet confidence settle within her. She was no longer concerned with what others might say or think. She had learned, through the simplest moments with Aaron, that the power of love transcended all of that. It was about the connection they shared, about the joy and laughter they found in each other's company, and about the tenderness that had bloomed between them in such an unexpected way. Love had come to her at a time she hadn't expected. It had arrived gently, like a whisper, and it had taken root in her heart. And now, she was ready to embrace it fully. Claire smiled to herself, feeling a quiet joy. It was a new beginning, a beginning that was as vibrant and full of possibility as any she had ever known. Love is not bound by time, she thought. It is simply boundless. And with that thought, she opened the door to a future she had once believed was closed, and stepped into it without hesitation.